Government talks about speed. We have a debt crisis in this country, right? I think the debt is out of control. The impact that has on the economy. Usually when you move faster, it costs more, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. So I think there's going to have to be some real trade-offs on, between speed, cost, quality. And I think the government is going to have to be more focused around affordability. So I think the contractors that can be more productive and do things at a lower cost are going to do better in 3 years.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast that we put together to bring together experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering. And we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everyone, it's Jake. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Future of GovCon. This week we have a legend in the industry, a name that most people know. Byron Bright is joining us, I think all the way from Texas. Is that right, Byron?
I am in Houston, Texas. That's correct.
God bless you. I lived in Houston 1 year working for Brown and Root back in the day. I was KBR actually. It was on Clinton Drive.
Yeah. I started on Clinton Drive, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Back in the boom days. For those of you that don't know Byron, some of you might not, and I'd be shocked if you haven't heard his name anyway, but Byron's been just a great leader, a great person within government contracting for a couple of decades now. But of course, his claim to fame has been help leading KBR through a meteoric rise and a transformation for about 15 years, where his last role was as the chief operating officer for the overall KBR business unit. But prior to that, spent some time in Jacobs, actually sold coffee for a while and was in the Air Force, but we'll get to dig into that a little bit. But a fantastic career. And I always say Byron was coming in KBR as I was leaving, but there was a gap there and I was going to investigate the share price while we were, and one of us wasn't there, but no, good to have you here, Byron.
Thanks, Jake. No, it's great. Really excited to talk about the industry. I love this industry. I've been a part of it pretty much my whole life. So I'm excited to share my thoughts and I always enjoy talking with you, Jake. So appreciate you inviting me.
Yeah, we were just catching up the other day. I was like, man, we got to get you on the podcast. That'd be fun to talk. Just an easy conversation. Obviously, we both have a love of guitars. We have our history inside KBR. And yeah, just a genuine love and curiosity about this industry where we've literally grown up. So should be a fun discussion. So let's go back to the beginning, Byron, as I like to do, and just kind of get to know you a little bit. Talk about growing up as a young man. What influenced you? What got you in the direction that you're on now?
Yeah, no, I grew up in the Southeast. I did not come from a military family. I went to high school in Georgia, so I kind of consider that home, but really moved around the Southeast a lot. But I think like all kids, right? Yeah, I think it was 1986, so that would have made me about 12 years old when I watched Top Gun. So you want to be, a fighter pilot, I think. And I think from that moment on, I just wanted to go in the Air Force. It was just nothing about it. It was one of those things where I said, I'm going to go to the Air Force Academy. People thought I was like, you're 12 years old. You don't know anything, And sure enough, I was fortunate enough to get into the Air Force Academy. I just always had a passion for airplanes and aerospace and wanted to make that, my career. Really had no idea what the real military was like and had no idea what, GovCon industry was like. But I think, a lot of those passions of science and engineering, I'm kind of a little bit of a technical geek, so it always just kind of converged together to lead me on that path.
It's funny. We just had a podcast with Lieutenant General Abu Nahom. He was a F-15 and F-22 pilot, and I asked him about the impact of Top Gun on him. He's like, yeah, that was it got him pretty excited when it came out
Yeah.
about becoming a
Yeah, I
pilot.
know it's a little silly, but I think my dad actually flew. He had his private license when I was a kid, and he had flew a little Cessna. So I did have a little flying around early as a kid too. So I think that definitely influenced me. Just to want to be part of that industry. And again, more the engineering side of things. And as it turned out, I went on to the Air Force Academy, and as would have it, my eyes weren't good enough. So you quickly find out as you get in that you're not going to be a fighter pilot because of your eyes. And so I went into engineering and loved it and did great. And the Air Force was wonderful to me. Was really 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 fortunate kind of coming out of there. And in fact,
Do you
I
remember
still
the
wanted.
day do you remember the day when you got the medical readout that says you're not gonna be a pilot?
Yeah, I do. I mean, it was pretty early on. I think like freshman year or whatever. You go through a bunch of testing, whatnot, and then I went on to a specialist to try to. It's depth perception, so they're pretty much like, there's nothing we can do about that. If you can't, if you don't have depth perception, you probably ought not be flying a plane. I think by then you mature, you grow up, right? You recognize you're in something bigger than just flying. You're part of the military. And I think that, that meant a lot to me to be part. I mean, the academy was very formative, of who I am as a leader and and my values and kind of, it really had a major impact on me. And so, I think all those things, you move on and get on it pretty quick. And there's some pretty cool stuff going on in the Air Force at that time. So, I actually got out and went and got a master's degree at Georgia Tech. So, Air Force paid for that, and couldn't be
Oh,
more
nice.
thankful and blessed. And so my first year as a second lieutenant, I was actually wearing civilian clothes and hanging out in Atlanta. So not a bad gig.
Oh, man.
And then my first assignment, just really luck, got stationed down at Eglin Air Force Base, and so
Wow.
as an analyst, really helping integrate air-to-air missiles on F-15 and F-16. So I was on the flight line. I was working with Lockheed and Boeing and Raytheon, and really my first introduction to the GovCon industry, just as a dumb second lieutenant. And I got to be a mission, kind of a test mission commander, if you will. And we were shooting live fire missiles, at remote controlled F4s out over the Gulf of Mexico, and that was my first assignment. I mean, just total luck that I got that luck of the draw there, and that got me into kind of my dream of being around aircraft and that community. And was fortunate enough after that to go on to test pilot school. So uh, just because I was
Okay.
in the test community, and I went to test pilot school as one of the youngest guys there in my class. By the way, when you're the youngest guy at test pilot school, you become the snacko, so you're the snack officer. So I had
Oh,
to,
okay.
yeah, so I had to go. This is out Edwards in California, and I'd have to go every week with my wife and drive into Lancaster to the Costco or whatever, Sam's or whatever it was, and buy all the snacks for the squadron, and manage the money for the snacks. So it's a horrible job, by the way.
Well,
But
that got you ready for, future logistics.
that's right.
Uh,
That's where I started
Good.
learning my
Great.
logistics, like for sure. But yeah, so
Go
I
back
went as an engineer, so
go
so as a
back to
backseater.
go back to Byron as a kid, though. Were you, what kinda were you a good kid? When you got in the Air Force Academy, you must have made pretty good
I
grades.
was a good kid. No, I had a good family. I have, older sister and a younger brother, and my mom and dad met in high school, and so I just had the normal kind of middle class upbringing, and we were a good family, and I never got in any real trouble. I was a little bit of a, like I said, I was a little bit of a nerd, probably academic wise. Always curious about things, love to learn. I mean, to this day, I think that's why I like guitar. It's just you're always learning something new. And so I think that love of knowledge and learning is really, what drove me as a kid and kind of led me down the path.
And at the academy, was there any stigma between the flyers and the non-flyers? Were people recognized as such?
I think there's always that little bit of stigma. It's funny, my year, we were one of the smallest to graduate classes, maybe forever. And my year, they had too many. They had, they never can get it right. They recruit too many pilots, and then they don't have enough slots, and then the next year they recruit less. And so I was one of those classes where they recruited a bunch of kind of geeky smart kids, and not that many pilots. And I think most of them flunked out. To be honest with you, we had like one of the biggest failure rates our freshman year. And, I think that goes to you got to be a pretty well-rounded person, right? And I think that's, the more well-rounded you are academically, athletically, emotionally, I think you become a better leader. And so it's always interesting to see that ebbs and flows. But no, I think at the academy, you're all pretty equal. I mean, you come in together as a class, and you're just trying to survive, and so you become really tight with your class. I mean, to this day, I'm close with my classmates, and stay connected with them. And I think there's just something special about, just like when you go in the military and basic training, or other major things in life. Probably your brown and root friends when you were overseas together, right? Your battle buddies. You just never lose those people, and I think the academies are much like that as well. So um,
Yeah.
yeah.
So- And as a young officer, as a test pilot, and you said interfacing with government contractors. At what point
Yeah,
did you
100%.
decide maybe that's what you wanted to do, or
Oh, I never wanted to do that. No, that was not my goal in life. And in fact, I mean, we can go into it. When I got out as a captain after 8 years, and my one goal was to not be a defense contractor.
yeah?
I clearly
A lot of
failed in
people
life.
say that. A lot of
Yeah.
people say
Well,
that, and
I
they get
think,
sucked back in.
yeah, I think it was more of, you're at that point in your life. So after test pilot school, and just to clarify, I was a flight test engineer, so I was a backseater, not a pilot. But after test pilot school, I got stationed back down at Hurlburt and was working with the special ops teams on the MH-53, the big payload helicopters. So flying around in the back of those, and just amazing people. We were working with the special ops teams and training, and deploying new avionics, and new guns, and you name it. And so that was awesome. But I get to that point, I had a young family, recently married, young child, and decided, hey, I think I need to settle down, and stop moving around, and those kind of things. That 8-year point's kind of the math that says either stay in for the retirement or get out. And I think a lot of officers make that decision. So I decided I'm going to go commercial. I just want to do something totally different. It's a chance in life to, to try to, be more of a business guy. I always loved business. Read a lot of business books, and just always kind of stayed in tune with investing in those things. And so yeah, I was fortunate enough. I went through a recruiting firm, actually, that was amazing for junior military officers. Cameron Brooks was the firm.
Cameron
Um,
Brooks, I remember it.
yeah, yeah, and they were awesome. And I got interviews with all these Fortune 500 companies, and ended up working at Procter and Gamble down in New Orleans. And so it was like I'm not going to be a defense contractor. And that was one of those other life changing events, because I moved down to New Orleans 6 months before Katrina, and
Wow.
Hurricane Katrina. And I absolutely loved it. I was a mechanical engineer by education, and so you're working in a factory, and just big equipment, and massive conveyor belts, and machinery. I was an ops guy, so I was leading a team of 70 unionized, workers, and they were all amazing. I mean, these workers had been there for generations. I mean, they all lived in the lower ninth ward. They were part of the Procter and Gamble family, and I was still a pretty young guy compared to the teams I was leading. And much like having your first sergeant with you, some of those union leaders, just took me under their wing and kind of helped me be a good leader. And but 6 months in, Katrina hits, wipes out most of those people. Most of them lived, deep in New Orleans, and generations of them, families lost. And I think that's where I did my first contingency work. So I think that's where I learned contingency, was not through KBR, was actually through Procter and Gamble. And not to make it a long story, but it was the plant manager was actually an Annapolis grad, and believe it or not, and had gone through Cameron Brooks, and was a naval captain, retired. Him and me and a small group of people, uh, kind of went into crisis management mode, and we set up a crisis center in middle of Louisiana, and found our 500 employees that were all over the southeast. And then over a number of months, rebuilt the plant. We brought in 175 FEMA trailers, and we had to go out and find catering, and get electrical and water and everything else you would need to get a plant started. And we were one of the first operations back up in New Orleans. And I think that was one of those moments in life that just transforms your perspective on
Early
leadership in life.
early contingency operations experience. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, you
absolutely. And yeah, and I could tell 100 funny stories about it, but yeah, no, at the end of that, I think my
there's a
wife and
lot
I
of,
were like, no,
on that topic of the JMOs, and I think you and I have talked about this before, like, what a great talent set, right? You're a JMO, I'm a JMO. Let's see, Ian Dolan's a JMO, Doug McGee. There's a lot
I
of
think it's
JMOs
unpacked.
kind of sprinkled around the industry, and it's folks that we didn't make it to colonel or general or whatever. We did our 4 or 5 years and got out, and but took a lot of lessons with us into our time in industry.
Yeah, I think that's something industry could learn from. I think the reason for me anyway was the amount of um, empowerment I was given as a young officer. I mean, literally as a second lieutenant down at Eglin, I am the program manager for AMRAM and helping design very complex tests. And, I'm sitting there in a room full of, Lockheed Martin executives and, very senior test pilots and colonels and whatnot, but I'm the guy in charge. And I did have a contractor beside me, by the way. It was believe it or not, it was a Jacobs contractor on the T's contract, a man named Dan Young. And I would sit there as a dumb second lieutenant planning these things, and my support contractor would just whisper in my ear, "Hey, this is what you're going to have to say. Just go tell the colonel this." And he really mentored me again, on how to be this test leader. But I think as a young officer, getting that much just pushed into the fire a little bit, right? Ability and ownership and empowerment. And I think that's why, as junior military officers move into the business world, they tend to do quite well. I think there's a lesson there for industry for young people that we should load them up, give them more. I mean, they're hungry, they're smart. They just come out of college, they're ready to go. And I think industry sometimes, particularly my industry, that's more of a service industry, we tend to look for the high end PhDs and experienced people. And I think there's an untapped talent pool, both at the young level and the JMO level for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's it always amazed me that these Cameron Books and Lucas groups, they generally pointed towards the Procter and Gambles and the GEs instead of pointing towards the government contractors who, like the security clearance, they like the
Yeah,
understanding of the mission. Most been deployed and have been end users to some extent. So it's a really really valuable talent set. We try to tap into that and have looked at setting up a whole program just to focus on GovCon there. So
yeah, for sure.
how did you get back into you said you
Well,
were
so
sitting
it
next to
was
the J
Yeah, so a friend of mine, again, I think it's all about relationships and networks and those kind of things. But a friend of mine that I had actually worked with in the Air Force had gone to Jacobs, and they'd always been after me when I left, and I was like, no, I don't want to be a defense contractor. And kind of after about 6 months after Katrina, he called me up and just checking on me and how you doing, and it was tough, right? We went, it was my house flooded totally, so my wife had to move back, to stay with her mom. We went to a 7-day on, 7-day off schedule because we were living in FEMA trailers in the parking lot of the Procter and Gamble plant. And so on my 7 days off, I'd go back and rip drywall out and try to rebuild my house, by myself. And then my 7 days on, I'd work in the plant. And so after doing that for a while, my buddy called and said, "Why don't you just bring your wife up to Tullahoma, Tennessee, of all places, where Jacob's government was?" And he goes, "Just a free weekend. Just come up, hang out. We'll pay for it. Take you to a nice dinner." Because you're, and so I said, "Sure, let's get out of here." And so my wife and I went up there for a free weekend, and I just fell in love with the team. There was a guy there who became my mentor, leading that group, Kenny Frame. I don't know if you know him. He's retired now, but he went on after Jacobs. Did really well in Jacobs, and then was the president of ERC, a small business there out of Huntsville. But Kenny had created this, just you could just feel the buzz. Like you walked in their office, and there was 7 or 8 people there, um, that were doing business development. And he's like, he was recruiting kind of a new team, kind of in that same JMO style. And he had picked 5 or 6 people. 5 of them were internal. I was the only external. And he was like, "I'm looking for, he's like, we would like you to come join our BD team." I'm like, I don't know what BD is. I'd never read an RFP. I didn't
right.
understand BD. And he's like, I can teach you that. And he goes, I'm looking for leaders, people that are doers, they're strategic. And you could just feel the excitement in that team. And I said, I want to be part of that, and so yeah, so that's how I got into it, and moved my family up to Tullahoma, and not just Kenny, but I could list all their names. I mean, Lou Hickok, Lisa Wright, Dan Pierre. I mean, these were kind of legends, in the BD world of Jacobs, who really built their government business, and just incredible talented people that I was mentored by, and moved up through back into the industry. And it's really that's how I say I learned the GovCon
Yeah.
industry, was really through those, formative years there.
How did you get into KBR? What does the transition look like?
Yeah, so I did well, and we did a lot of bids in Jacobs at NASA and other locations, and then I moved over and actually ran their Department of Energy sales team in Oak Ridge for a while, and was doing great, loved it, did not want to go anywhere. Jacobs was great to me, and then it was actually Mark Williams, who had been an executive in Jacobs, had gone to KBR. I didn't know Mark, but my mentor Kenny, that was his mentor. So again, it goes back to these relationships and networks. And so Mark had called Kenny and said, I need a new BD guy. I'm over here at KBR. He was relatively new to KBR, and he's like, all we have is LOGCAP and this kind of logistics stuff, and we need to modernize the business and transform the business. Who could help me? And Kenny recommended me, and I didn't really want to go. I was very happy at Oak Ridge and very happy, whatever. But Kenny was like, "You got to go." I mean, he's like, "This is a step change for your career," and so I did it, and the rest is history. But yeah,
That was
so
2010. What was happening back then? I'm trying to think. What was happening
so
in
that
KBR?
was from 2010. Yeah, I did not do my diligence on KBR, by the way, so I was a little naive when I came over. But I think 2010, they
Bodie
were.
Bodie was gone, wasn't he?
Yeah,
Joe
I think
Bodie.
so. I think he left right as I came on. We just missed each other there, I think. But it was kind of coming towards the end, what we thought was the end, right? They just switched over to LogCap 4. I think that was in 2008 or something. There was an overlap of 3 and 4, right? They were running them both at the same time, but they were splitting up Afghanistan, and for those that don't know, KBR and LogCap 3 built basically Afghanistan, Iraq, all the Middle East. And it was this massive contract that was really probably too big for one contractor. And the government decided to make it multiple award. And I think Fluor won the North, I think, and DynCorp the South, or vice versa in Afghanistan. And KBR retained Iraq. And it was still a massive operation at that time. And when I came on in 2010, like I said, I didn't really know what I was getting into. Believe it or not, I didn't know what LogCap was. I came out of the technical side of GovCon. I was doing, Air Force and Navy and weapons and avionics. I'd never even heard the word LogCap. I mean, that's how disconnected, I think I was when I was at Jacobs from that side of the mission, because Jacobs had chosen to not really go overseas and had stayed more on the technical side. And I show up, and and I was told it's a $3 billion business. It was $3 billion a year revenue in government that year. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm going to be the head of sales of a $3 billion massive business. And I walk in the door, it's like one contract. And I didn't realize that. I assumed it was this massive, diverse kind of contract, and it was literally LogCap. They had a small construction business. They did some milcon back then, and, with Department of State embassies and some other kind of small milcon jobs. But it was pretty much just LogCap. And so those first couple of years, I was just like, wow, how do we transform this business? But the people were great, and the mission was amazing, and that warfighter ethos was there. I mean, you lived it, you know what it was like. And I think if you've got good people and good talent, and then you can do anything. And I think that's what KBR had when I joined. So I was fortunate to at least have, the right kind of work ethic and integrity and things that KBR had, and you can build from there.
Was that was it red lanyard when you were there, or was it changed
We were red
overall?
lanyard, yeah, 100% red lanyard. Yeah, I was one of the guys that changed it to blue. I still think
I'm
I
about to
get a
say,
lot. I still get a
well,
lot
that
of
was
flack for
brilliant
getting
though.
the.
No, it was brilliant because I remember just the visible demonstrative change that you guys are bringing in, and repositioning KBR more as a technology integrator versus a services, logistics type company, more of a, on the CETA
Yeah,
side
and
or
that's what really happened from 2010 until about 14. It was coming off a cliff, right? It was the end of the Iraq war, and we went from, I always say I was the worst sales guy ever, because we went from 3 billion a year to literally 300 million a year in revenue. And it was brutal. I mean, those first 3 or 4 years I joined KBR, it was just, and it had nothing to do with our performance. It was just the end of, it was a cycle, and it was the
efficiency. Yeah.
end of the war and downsizing. So we were laying off people, and we were kind of in a, existential crisis about, okay, who are we and what are we going to do? And we just didn't have a lot of capability outside of logistics. We had an amazing history of logistics and construction, but we just didn't have any real else to grow. And what I was able to do was diversify in the Navy. And so that was, about all I could in the Air Force. And so during that period, we won Diego Garcia and Djibouti and Bahrain, and then Turkey, Spain. We'd been part of that as a joint venture and ultimately won it as a prime. And so we were able to kind of build out our contingency logistics portfolio, and a few and some of our construction work as well. And so that built us back up to 500 or 600 million a year, kind of in that 2014, 2015 timeframe, and at least gave us some, something to grow from. And then in 2015, we got a new CEO came in and was actually looking to, he shut down certain businesses, sold off some pieces, reorganized. He probably would have got rid of the government if he could have, but we had so many legal issues and legacy issues with LOGCAP 3, they really couldn't get rid of us. So, kind of raised my hand, was like, hey, there's a
I'll do
whole
it.
nother GovCon industry out there, right? I mean, all you guys know is logistics. I said, but there's this whole other world out there. And that really started the discussion about, how do we transform this business? And we did a lot of that through acquisitions, which I'm sure we can talk about. But I think that was kind of the turning point that, gave us, once we had proven we could win some work, within what we knew. I think the board got comfortable that, hey, this team can do other things, and we put together a thesis and pushed forward on that. And I'm sure we'll dive into that if you want.
Yeah, I mean, you did some really smart M&A. I was always watching the deals you would do and the capability you would add on and the markets you would buy into. So talk a little bit about the thought process behind that and how that fit into the overall strategy.
Yeah, I think that, I think once we kind of got the buy-in internally that we needed to transform, it was really about coming up with a thesis. And for me, it was, regardless if it's Republican or Democrat, regardless of whether the economy is, good or bad, what are those like 10-year things that are going to be there no matter what? And we came up with, it wasn't just me, by the way, the whole team of people, but, we came up with a set of themes, and today they sound, like the buzzwords, but this was in 2016. And I think we were a little bit ahead of our time. And the first was defense modernization. I mean, me coming out of Jacobs, having worked on the Air Force side, I mean, every one of our systems were getting old and dated, right? Some of these aircraft and things are 20 and 30 years old. And so you just knew they were going to have to modernize, avionics, weapons, aircraft, and that no matter what, they were going to have to do that. And so, we focused on defense modernization. Space was, just starting to become that warfighting domain. This was prior to the Space Force. And so we
Right.
said
Yeah.
space superiority was going to be, a key theme that we could just see technology expanding there. The third one was a little weird, actually, but it was health and human performance. We felt like as a service company, the soldier in the loop was always going to be critical, and you needed to have that kind of human performance element, human centric element. And so whether that be training or health or whatever it might be, was our third theme. And finally, our fourth theme was maybe not quite on point. It was cyber. And I think that's morphed into digital and AI and all the things you see today. But we kind of knew that this IT cyber world. So those were our four big themes. And we said, no matter what happens, if we invest in those four themes, we're going to be successful. And in 2016, we were introduced to Wiley, which was about an $800 million a year company at the time, and we were sitting around 500 or 600 million. So they're actually bigger than than the government piece. And when I say 500 or 600, KBR itself was, I don't know, 4 or 5 billion, but the rest of the company was oil and gas, and so the government piece was about 500 or 600 million. And Wiley was about 800 million. It was just it was a great cultural fit. they were so different from us. We were the warfighter, overseas, logistics, kind of construction guys, and they were systems engineers and and test and evaluation and research and development. And we were just two ends of the spectrum. But culturally, I think we both had that service orientation about being that government trusted partner. They were a CETA contractor, so they sat on the government side. They weren't a product per se, and I think that cultural aspect really helped us, blend together well. And our team had not done any acquisitions, so we were new to that side of the business. And the Wiley executive team had done several, and so they actually brought that capability. And I think it was just a great merger of the. In fact, I mean, many of those people are still at KBR today, and we're a great executive team. And then what's kind of crazy, like literally within after we closed that one, 30 days later, we bought Honeywell, Honeywell Technology Services, HTSI, which was the service piece of Honeywell. And I always say we probably wouldn't have bought HTSI first by itself, but because we had Wiley, it was almost this perfect fit in the middle, because you think of Honeywell being the hardware side, and this is the services piece of that. They had the pre-positioned stock programs. So the APSs that we have today came out of Honeywell, which is very close to logistics, but a little bit higher end because you're actually turning wrenches and doing different things. And then they actually had some NASA work. So they had the health and human performance work down at Johnson Space Center. Um, uh, I'm sorry, they didn't have that one. They had Goddard. I'm sorry, that was Wiley. They had the Goddard work. Think of the satellites, the ground stations, the Honeywell radar stuff. So they were doing the Goddard work. So they had a little bit of the high end NASA. They had a little bit of the tech. They fit right in the middle between Wiley and KBR, and it was just this perfect kind of marriage of the three companies. And we did that very fast back to back, which was a little risky just for a company that hadn't done a lot of acquisitions. But between the KBR team, I mean, I took on integrating Wiley, and then the Wiley team took on integrating Honeywell. So we actually had two parallel integrations, two different
Wow.
teams
I didn't
working
realize that.
together. Pretty unique situation to put all that together, and that was in 2016, and it worked out great. And so a year later, in 2017, at that time I was still running the KBR piece of the business, and the Wiley CEO actually ran the whole combined entity. And then he left after a year. It was all pre-planned, and he left after a year. And then the CEO Stewart came to me and said, "Hey, would you like to take on the president role of this new business?" And that was in May of 2017. And I said, "I'd be honored to." That's how I kind of got out of sales into the operational side of things, and then we continued that acquisition journey after that.
How did you, I mean, you didn't have any M&A background. How did you get in there? And I mean, you seem to get pretty good at it just by doing it.
Yeah,
What was
I didn't look. Stewart and Mark Sopp, who's the current CFO. I mean, those guys had come from big companies, and they had done a lot of deals, and so they definitely brought the deal side, that I didn't personally have. I think I had the industry, the domain knowledge, the strategy side. And so those first couple of deals, I mean, they definitely added, into that. Could not have done it without them. So I think that was a nice mix, of the teams, having that corporate team that could really help the deal mechanics of things, and then having the people. And I think one of the successes of KBR's acquisitions has been that we in the business did it. We didn't hire tons of outside consultants. I mean, it was we had to know the business, the people, we had to own it. You had to be part of it. We did the diligence ourselves. And I think, a lot of companies outsource those things, and we just did it ourselves. And it's like having two jobs. It was hard work, but it's also super fun. And you get to meet just amazing people. And I mean, everywhere you go, you run into new technologies and new capabilities. And I think, we put a really strong focus on cultural fit. Um, and, and, um, and not having that arrogance. We used to say, don't have the arrogance of the acquirer. So when you acquire a company, don't think, oh, we bought you. No,
That
we're
happens so
partners, we're
much.
teammates. Yeah, it does happen a lot, right? And
I've seen it.
our
I've
our
seen a
our
lot of
philosophy.
deals that lost value because of that. Where the acquiring company had the hubris and just drove off all the good talent that was in the acquired company, which is what they paid for, right?
Was what you paid for, right? And particularly the first one. like I said, I was kind of leading it in KBR, but at the end of the day, we put the Wiley guy in charge, right? And it was because they had better people. They had better systems. They had better knowledge of that market. And so, they had done M&A, and they had done, more technology. And so, we learned from them. And I would say every acquisition we did after that, I could point to something we took from that company and scaled it across KBR. It was like, oh, they've got a great training program, or they've got a tech fellows program, or whatever it might be. Their benefits are better. Let's change our benefits for the whole company to match theirs. Every single time we tried to find, something from that company coming in that would change the rest of us. And I think being open and humble and willing to change, uh, one makes those people feel like, hey, we're really part of the team, we're at value, but it also, makes us better as well. I think that's really been the secret to success. It's just that humility and that openness to learn across these acquisitions.
How was it dealing with your counterparts over on the energy side? I mean, the whole time you guys are you're acquiring, you're growing, you're diversifying, and you still have the core, not core, but I guess it's core, the energy, the sustainability. How much did you come across and deal with your counterparts over there?
A lot. I think we always tried to find the synergies where we could, and I think it ebbed and flowed over the years between where it made sense it did. And if you go back to the old red KBR, I think they were very siloed. We didn't hardly talk to those guys. And it was a very different company back then. Once we kind of flipped to the blue KBR in 2016, 2017, I think we became much closer as an executive team. And so when I joined the ELT, now they call it STS, Sustainable Technology Solutions, is what they call their energy and infrastructure business. We were colleagues and partners and friends, and I think everywhere we could, we shared where we could. So there was synergy there between, particularly overseas. As we would go into a new country, oftentimes the oil and gas guys were already there, right? So they might have the business license, the taxes. People don't think about, as a commercial company going to a new country, all the things you have to do to build a supply chain. And so part of the benefit to the US military was the fact that we could pretty much go anywhere in the world. My guess was KBR was already there in some form or fashion. And so we could ramp up much faster. And we saw that in, just in the recent history in Eastern Europe. Obviously KBR had been in Eastern Europe a long time on the government at Kosovo and other places, but overnight we had to go in, like, 15 different countries to support Ukraine. A lot of the infrastructure was there from the oil and gas business to help us quickly, come up to speed. And we shared supply chain, and we shared procurement, and we shared other things. And then in the back office, being a global company, you get a lot of synergies there. They have an operations center in India where we could do a lot of our, kind of back office type work, at a lower cost. And so a lot of those things really help the company. But I would say, yeah, in the latter years, particularly, I think we were really, really close, and tried to break down those walls and become kind of one KBR. And I think we did a pretty good job at it.
I think so too, and you kept the brand, on either side. What would be your if you had to pick one highlight of your career there at KBR, what would it be?
Wow. That's hard. 15 years, a lot of really cool stuff. Man, I don't know. I think, OAW was probably one of those for me. OAW is Allied Welcome. Sorry, Operation Allied Welcome, and that's when Afghanistan was falling, and they had to uh, take care of 50,000 Afghans just like overnight. And I was leading our business at the time, and I remember this clearly. General Daly, 4-star at the time of AMC, called me and I'd known General Daly for a long, since he was the theater commander in Europe, to when he went to Rock Island, and then he was AMC. Called me on my personal phone and was like, "I'm sure you're watching the news, seeing what's happened. We're going to have to house these people. Can you guys spin up under LOGCAP to do a 5,000 person man camp?" And I'm like, "Absolutely, no problem, sir. Got it. Where you need us, And then, like, an hour later, he calls me back and he goes, "Can you do a 10,000 person camp?" And I'm like, "Yes, sir. No problem. And then the next morning, I'm in the office and starting to spin things up, and he calls again. He's like, can you do 50,000? I'm like, I better go talk to my boss. So, and so I run down the hall and we get on the phone and, and say, we'll put the whole company behind this. And, it's going to be hard, but we think we can do it. We brainstormed, should you split it up to other contractors? And we felt it was moving so fast, you needed one single manager. But we reached out to our other contractors, to help. And we brought on some of those guys at times. So I think the industry really came together in that moment. But we did it. I mean, literally, it was hard and it wasn't pretty at times, but I mean, we pulled that off in about between 7 to 11 days. Multiple camps around the world, housing these people, and it was just heartwarming. I drove out to Fort Bliss probably on day 6 or 7, out in the middle. They were setting up a tent city out there, and you drive up and there's these families there, and there's little kids, kicking soccer balls, and you just felt like you were at some fob somewhere, and they were scared and they were disoriented and they didn't speak the language and they didn't eat the food, and I think the KBR people dropped everything to be there, and many of them you would know these folks. I think Dave Citron was running that base at the time, and Jason Pantoa was running that, and we were building as the people were arriving, and we were having to take care of them. And I just think that care and that get the mission done, and just to watch our people work 24/7, because it was important. And at the end of the day, they did it. So I think it's time like that, and I could give you story after story of
It's
situations
incredible.
where KBR did those kind of things. But that was just one of those global, overwhelming, um, you know, uh, missions that I'm very, very proud of.
It's it's almost like you were guest in their land, and then you had a chance to bring them into your land there.
Yeah, and it's different. We took care of soldiers, right? So very healthy 18-year-old, soldiers around the world. And suddenly you're taking care of young kids and I mean elderly. I think don't quote me on the numbers, but something like over 30 or 40% of the population were under the age 16. And and they were running everywhere. I mean, and we were scared to death somebody was going to get hurt, right? We had big machinery, and so we had special safety in place to make. We found a kid, just playing hide and seek, hiding up on the wheel of a big bulldozer and stuff like that. And so just making sure you clear the area before you did anything. And so we didn't have any major incidents throughout all of that. And it was just it was a partnership between the government. We couldn't have done it without them, couldn't have done it without our subcontractors, our teammates around the world, and even our big primes around the world. I mean, we all coordinated together. And I think that's something people don't get in the GovCon industry. We compete with each other, but whether it's Fluor or DynCorp or V2X or Amentum, whoever, we all know each other, and when we need each other, we come together. I mean, and so I think that's something special in the industry that's probably overlooked by a lot of people, but you've got a lot of veterans that really care. And I think, we're there for the mission as much as we are there for the business.
Yeah. So you've you've transitioned out of KBR and you're looking at a new era in life. I think we're about the same age in the industry. I mean, 25 has been a massively transformational year, right? What are you watching right now in our industry in government contracting that kind of has your interest, has your focus?
Yeah, like I said, I'm always been a technology guy first, even though I've spent a lot of my time in logistics. I was never where I intended to be, but I love logistics. When you get into that logistics stuff, you just can't help but get emotional about it. I mean, because you're really taking care of people. But at the end of the day, I think technology is changing the face of everything we do. And whether you want to dive into AI or C5ISR or space systems, whatever it might be, the technology is moving at such a rapid rate that our government is struggling to keep up. It's not just trying to keep up with our adversaries, it's just keeping up with modern technology, right? It's just, I mean, their systems are just so big and so complex, and how do they make all these things work together? So for me, as I look, leaving KBR was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I absolutely love that company, but it was just time. And for those watching, they're splitting the company, and I think a lot of the industry is going to go through some of these kind of changes. And so it was just a good time for me to switch. But I'm putting a lot of my personal energy in various technology ideas and startups and things like that. So I'm talking to a lot of different companies about how do we help the government move faster. And I think you hear that across the government, from government leaders, is right now it's about speed. And so I think, that's what I see happening in the government. And you're right. I think 25 has been a very challenging year, particularly for service contractors, starting out with Doge and what does that mean? The introduction of AI and everything. What does that mean? The shutdown, which lasted quite long. And now this act reform stuff that's going on is like, what does this mean for our industry? And so I think we're at this inflection point, and I'm excited to see kind of where it goes. And personally, I want to be a part of it. And got a lot of options out there, and we'll get back into a senior role next year, I'm sure. But right now, I'm just spending a lot of time learning and really trying to figure out, how can I add the most value, and where can I help the warfighter the most.
Where do you think this procurement reform, what is it really going to mean? And where does it create opportunities for those that are paying attention?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm an eternal optimist. I've been frustrated with acquisition processes for a long time in different ways, and so I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic that there will be some real change to make it more uh, easier to do business with the government. Although it's hard, and I don't blame the government. I just think it's complicated. When you're dealing with public money and you're dealing with the complexity of issues. Oh, yeah, I think it's going to move slower than we all want. I think we won't get. We've got how many act reform things have we gone through in the past? It won't go all the way there. Congress is going to get a vote at some point, and Congress has their own. You got 535 members that have their own kind of ideas on what where money should be spent, and I think all those things just complicate, government, procurement and funding. But I do think there is an opportunity here to move faster, to be more commercial, to put common sense, into decision making, and I think, I'm very supportive of what Secretary Hegseth is asking for. I think the ideas of empowering the PAEs and to make those decisions as portfolios is great. And that's what business does, right? I always say decisions are made best closest to the customer, closest to the employee. So if you're bringing questions up to a CEO, to solve, then something's gone wrong, right? I mean, you should have smart people empowered to make those decisions. And I think the same way in the government. And these are really smart leaders in the government, accomplished, people that have seen a lot. Empower them to make those trade-offs and decisions. And so I'm very optimistic we're going to see, at least at some of those levels, at the programmatic level, some good decision making, faster decision making. The bureaucracy is still going to be there, but I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful.
So or what do you think? Let's look ahead. Uh, 3 years. I always say let's just do three. Let's not do 10, 5. Let's do something very reasonable. We're sitting here in the end of the year in 2028. We've had an election, but hasn't had a chance to wash through anyway. Whatever we're kind of dealing with this, whatever this administration is doing, the path we're on. What does government contracting look like? What does LOGCAP look like? What does this procurement form look like in its manifestation? What does our foreign policy look like?
Wow, those are big questions, Jake. I don't know that I have a great crystal ball. I think it's going to take longer than 3 years. I don't think you're going to see the massive change we all want in 3 years. I'm again, as I said, I'm hopeful. I think the other issue that we haven't talked about in this area is affordability, right? I think there's a real affordability issue that may manifest itself in the next 3 years. So, while the government talks about speed, we have a debt crisis in this country, right? I mean, I think the debt is out of control, the impact that has on the economy, and so I think when usually when you move faster, it costs more, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. So I think there's going to have to be some real trade-offs on, between speed, cost, quality, those things. And I think the government is going to have to be more focused around affordability. So I think the contractors that can um, be more productive and do things at a lower cost are going to do better in 3 years. And so I think those that can apply AI to be more productive or whatever it might be are going to win a bigger market share. I think you already see this kind of split in the market between defense tech, I'll call it, um, and service companies. And I think you're going to have to see some transformation in the services. I don't know what that exactly looks like yet, but I think you're going to see some major changes in the next 3 years in the you already see it. KBR splitting up. Other companies are trying to figure out what's their niche. We have these new entrants, the Silicon Valley guys, and I welcome them. I think they're amazing and their technology is great. There's still a real need in my mind. I worry that the government looks at the next shiny object and they haven't really thought through, and the Silicon Valley guys haven't thought through, how do we deploy that in a military relevant context, right? So you can have the coolest piece of tech, but how are you going to sustain it? How are you going to maintain it? How have you proven its lethality, its reliability? And there's a lot of these things that our procurement processes historically in the government have gotten longer and longer, but a lot of that is they're solving for all of those issues, interoperability, all the things that you need to have a system that will protect people's lives in the field and perform the mission. And I worry a little bit about, well, let's buy this latest drone or this gadget or that gadget. Okay, great. How do we deploy that? You're giving it to an 18-year-old soldier. How do you make sure that it's rugged enough that they're not going to break it? What's the supply chain behind it to fix it? All those questions have to be answered as you put new technology in the field. Um, and then what's your force structure around that? And so I think there's kind of got lost in the question here a little bit, but I just feel like I feel like there's going to be a change. You're going to continue to see these advancements on the tech side, and it's going to be amazing what they can do. But I think the service contractors, particularly, are going to have to become this bridge between the military and the tech guys, and
Okay.
help the tech guys put their products in a military relevant context. And I think you're going to see that change happen over the next 3 years pretty rapidly. I think you're going to see something happen in all these service providers where they're going to become a little bit more like a product guy, but they're not going to do products, but they're going to have to help the government ultimately own the tech baseline, own the interoperability, and be that expertise for the government. And so I think you're going to see some pretty big changes in the services as they help integrate these two pieces.
I think some of the practicalities, like the challenges in INDOPACOM, ideas of deploying all this technology, but you still, as General Nahom said, you gotta have power, you gotta have comms, you gotta have logistics. Um, all that technology doesn't
Yeah.
do any good at some of those things.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it'll be 3 years, but I do think you're going to see transformation in the energy sector as well, right? And whether, that might take 5 or 10 years, but there's going to be some technological breakthroughs there. I just believe, and whether that's in battery power, whether that's in, small modular nuclear reactors. But all those things are going to have an impact on the military. They're going to impact the commercial world. They're going to impact data centers and AI. But I think there's also this whole resurgence of the energy needs. We recognize, to your point, without energy, you can't hardly do anything. And so that's going to become another, big investment area, I think, in the GovCon industry is helping the government solve their energy problems as well
Huge,
around the world,
huge
particularly things like
opportunity.
yeah, huge
Yeah,
opportunity. So,
huge opportunity. Where do you see Byron Bright in 3 years? Heading into
well,
Christmas 2028?
well, I want to say I want to beach somewhere, but I've learned over the last 6 months that I can't just sit on the beach. I have too much energy. So you'll see me. I don't know where I'll be exactly. I hope I'm back in the aerospace and defense industry. Like I said, I love the mission and I care about the people. But I'm also a technology guy, so and I understand the energy markets too. So you could see me over there as well. But if I'm over there, I hope I'm helping push commercial solutions back into the GovCon. No, I'm definitely want to get back into a senior role. For me, it's about helping people, building teams, really enjoying who you work with, having an impact on something. And so, wherever I can have the most impact is where I'll be. But I'm not going anywhere, so I still got a lot of years left in me, and I definitely learned that I'm not a guy to go sit on the beach or play golf. So I'm going to have to get back in the game pretty soon.
Play a little guitar. Yeah. I mean, the industry definitely wants to have you as one of the leaders, and it's great discussion. I want to give you one last chance. I'll give you one word, your gut feeling about the future of government contracting from your perspective. What's one word you would say?
Exciting. I think I'll say
Okay.
exciting. I don't know that we've seen this kind of transformation and the opportunity to transform in a long time. I think it's this convergence of
Almost the
people.
permission to transform, right? Like there's
Yeah,
trick.
it is. It is. There's this necessity out there. There's permission from the government. And you've got this technology change, and you've got the geopolitical changes, and you've got just so much this act reform. And I just feel like we're at one of these moments, in time where we'll look back on this and go, yeah, this was an inflection point for the next 20 years. And we had that after 9/11, right? 9/11 hit, and it changed everything about the GovCon industry, for 2 decades. And I feel like we've come through that now. The geopolitical situation is different, the threat situation is different, the technology is different, and we're about to have another major kind of pendulum swing in the GovCon industry. And it's going to be exciting. I mean, it's going to be. I'm an optimist. The opportunity is out there, whether you're on the tech side or the services side. And at the end of the day, it's how do we do what's right for the country? How do we do it right for our allies? And how do we take care of a warfighter? And yeah, so exciting would be my word.
Exciting is a good word. I think there's so much change being driven from within that hopefully that's enough. I mean, without an externality, without a major event or something that would really, really accelerate the change. But you're in the prime of your career. You got a tremendous track record and just well liked across the industry. And look forward to staying in touch and seeing what the future holds.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate for what you do. People don't realize what your company does, and you've been very giving to me personally. You've mentored many feds coming out. I know there's been a lot of change on that side of the house this last year, and you and your team are just fantastic and giving of yourselves. And so I appreciate what you do for the industry. No, great to call you a friend, and thanks you for inviting me. And I look forward to following your podcast, seeing who else you can get
We
on here.
we enjoy having a chance to help people and change lives for a living. It's a lot of fun in an industry that we know and we love, and that's great. All right,
Yeah,
Byron.
no
Well, I'll
doubt.
see you around, I'm sure, soon. Hope you have a great holidays. To
You
our
too.
listeners, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Future GovCon. Look forward to seeing you next week. Make sure you share this with your friends, pass it around, put on social media, help spread the word. We have some great people coming on. If you haven't looked at some of our historical podcasts, we got some really interesting content. But Byron, thanks again, sir, and we look forward to seeing you around the industry of the next year.
Thanks, Jake. Appreciate it a lot.
All right, so thanks for joining me on another episode of the Future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there. And you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.